In the 21st century, members of the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners of America work in many crafts, in industries that are constantly changing. We are a broad and diverse union with nearly 500,000 members in the United States and Canada. Our crafts include every kind of carpentry, from foundations to framing to furniture, from homes to high-rises to bridges and highways. Carpenters help to build it. We include other major crafts too. Millwrights work on the power plants and precision machinery that drive our industrial economy. Pile drivers are there at the start of every structure, on land and in the water. Floor layers use tools and materials both time-tested and high-tech. Lathers shape the often free-form look of modern structures. Mill cabinet workers work with furniture and laminated goods of every shape and kind. And UBC industrial workers work with wood-related products in many settings. Our proud and important history has made us the union we are today. How we got here has a lot to do with where we are going, and our history has a lot to teach us about how to get there. As with most crafts, the carpenters of colonial North America worked under their familiar European system of guilds. Apprentices became journeymen who became masters, the developers of their day. But all carpenters organized to set rates for the work they did.
Framing floors of joists of 9 inches deep, per square, 8 shillings. Girders of 7 inches deep, per foot running, 8 pence. The Carpenters Company Rule Book, 1786.
Activists from the start, American carpenters played key roles in the Revolution. They made up the core of the Boston Tea Party. In the Philadelphia Carpenters Hall, the delegates to the First Continental Congress met in 1774 to air their grievances against King George III. By the end of the 1700s, North American economic growth brought larger construction projects, more costly than most master carpenters could finance. Speculators began to displace them as developers and owners on new projects. Masters became contractors, and journeymen became wage workers. Because it was their labor creating the profits, journeymen were pushed to work harder for longer hours at the same day's wage. After years under this system, our forebears began to seek changes. By the 1830s, we were organizing unions in North America's many unconnected markets. In York, Ontario, carpenters organized to get paid on time. Elsewhere, carpenters agitated for shorter hours at the same day's pay.
We have been too long subjected to the odious, cruel, unjust, and tyrannical system which compels the operative mechanic to exhaust his physical and mental powers by excessive toil. Boston Carpenters, 1835.
Union journeymen in Philadelphia organized carpenter to carpenter with their non-union brothers. They sparked a citywide general strike that won the 10-hour day. Other cities followed suit. But cities soon were eclipsed as the fast-spreading railroads created nationwide labor markets in the U.S. and Canada. And those newly mobile wage workers found themselves in competition with slave labor. Abolitionist Frederick Douglass, in fact, had worked as a slave carpenter in the Baltimore shipyards.
The slave is robbed by his master, and the white man is robbed by the slave system because he is flung into competition with a class of laborers who work without wages. Frederick Douglass, 1858.
For carpenters, the battle to end slavery was an economic as well as a moral issue. After the Civil War, an industrial revolution began that transformed construction across the U.S. and Canada. It threatened to fragment the craft and drive down wages. Machines took the making of doors and windows out of the carpenter's workshop and into planing mills. Speculators sliced job site carpentry into repetitive tasks. apprenticeship disintegrated. Time and again, organized carpenters saw hordes of itinerant carpenters arrive by train. A national, even international union was needed. Peter J. McGuire, who had organized his brother carpenters in St. Louis, was called on to form such a union. The Brotherhood was founded in August 1881 in Chicago under a constitution that still governs the UBC today. McGuire's founding credo: educate, agitate, organize.
Every city should be organized, and the wages of all advance to a uniform standard. Men will not then rush readily from one city to another to fill the places of their brothers on a strike. Best of all, strikes will be less in number, for employers will then fear to oppose us. P.J. McGuire, The Carpenter, May 1881.
From the start, this was a union united for mutual support, as carpenters. Then, as now, a major portion of working carpenters were immigrants. McGuire ran articles in The Carpenter in German and other languages. He learned to speak German himself. In the South, white and black locals affiliated with the UBC. Because builders recruited strikebreakers to move both ways across the U.S.-Canada border, American and Canadian locals were chartered. The founders of the Brotherhood opened the union to everybody who did carpenter work, or what had ever been carpenter work. From highly skilled millwrights to workers in the planing and sawmills.
Competition among ourselves reduces wages and renders one workman the victim of another. But with organization, all this is changed. Hence, we must form a union broad enough to embrace every carpenter and joiner in the land. Preamble to the UBC Constitution, 1881.
McGuire also sparked the first Labor Day in New York City in 1882. Workers didn't ask permission, they just took the day off, showing their strength. City by city in the years following, they did the same, until the U.S. Congress and Canadian Parliament made the holiday official. Strikes for the 8-hour day in 1886 and 1890 brought tens of thousands of carpenters into the Brotherhood. To keep up with technological changes in the industry, local unions reinvigorated apprenticeship and acquired new skills. The young Brotherhood quickly gained strength and played a major role in organizing other labor groups. In 1886, McGuire and UBC leaders helped form the American Federation of Labor, predecessor of the AFL-CIO. And in Hamilton, Ontario, carpenter John Flett was an early president of the group that became today's Canadian Labour Congress. In those first 2 decades, the UBC grew by organizing aggressively. Journeymen organized carpenter to carpenter, then visited the contractors and told them what wages and conditions they would work under.
Des Moines, Iowa. The spirit of unionism among carpenters is spreading rapidly here. Each member has appointed himself a committee of one. Over 60 names have been added to our rolls.
Charleston, South Carolina. The 9-hour day has been established. The apprentice system is being enforced, and the bosses now pay off during working hours. We have no trouble with the contractors, except one, and he fell in line within 6 hours.
Auburn, New York. At a recent meeting, the following proposition was adopted, that on or after April 1st, 8 hours shall constitute a day's work. The craft is well organized here.
Success brought full-time general officers and a headquarters in Indianapolis. To police agreements, locals began hiring business agents. In markets the Brotherhood dominated, these business agents could organize directly with new contractors, organizing from the top down. But where that approach wasn't backed by carpenters recruiting one-on-one, organizing from the bottom up, the seeds of future problems were sown. In the early 20th century, major regional and national builders began to emerge. They attacked the carpenters in cities where the UBC was dominant: Chicago, New York, Toronto, and San Francisco. Despite the attacks, the UBC won union standards on government work during World War I. Tens of thousands of new workers were added to the union's rolls, long on numbers, but often short on personal commitment to the union. During the 1920s, the Brotherhood fought tough battles against continental big business organizations. City by city across North America, builders pushed the anti-union notion of the open shop. In the U.S., they called it the American Plan. In Canada, they dropped the name, but kept the strategy.
You can hardly conceive of a more un-American, a more anti-American institution than that the Union Shop. It is really very remarkable that it is allowed to exist under the American flag. National Association of Manufacturers, 1920.
But even during the 1920s construction boom, the Brotherhood launched no new organizing drives. The General Office began referring to organizers as international representatives. Membership stagnated. Some markets were lost entirely. The UBC had been wholly transformed. What began as an organizing union, members working together to add strength and market share, had become a servicing union, working mainly to protect existing jobs instead of organizing new jobs and new members. Membership became merely a business deal, and we lost the true meaning of brotherhood, the all-for-one activism.
When we became members, we looked over the available information, sized up our chances, became satisfied of the solvency of the organization, talked it over with the wife perhaps, and decided in our minds that here was a good investment. The Carpenter, August 1928.
The Depression hit construction hard. By 1933, 70% of union carpenters were jobless. Some carpenters and millwrights did find work on the large public works projects of Roosevelt's New Deal, including the Hoover and Grand Coulee dams and the Tennessee Valley Authority. Elsewhere, lumber and mill workers in the Pacific Northwest valiantly struggled to organize, and many became part of the Brotherhood. But for construction jobs, our proud union remained a top-down servicing organization that could do little besides circle the wagons. Then came World War II, which saw many unsung UBC heroes. When Pearl Harbor was bombed, our shipyard workers ran to help while the fires were still raging. Members built the factories and the war materiel. At the front of the front, they engineered our way across Europe. Other members formed the backbone of the Seabees, the Navy construction battalions building bases under fire across the Pacific. The war years saw membership double with the huge influx of workers into government war work. A construction boom followed the war and kept membership numbers high as returning GI members were welcomed back. In the post-war boom, membership in the Brotherhood reached new heights, more than 833,000 in 1973. And the UBC enjoyed a market share as high as 90% in many areas. The Brotherhood achieved solid benefits like health insurance, vacation pay, and pensions. Apprenticeship was also formalized. Joint union contractor apprenticeship standards and training centers flourished and multiplied. Carpenter wages in both the U.S. and Canada became among the highest in the world.
We were a militant union group, and there was very little non-union work. Contractors hired union people, and if they weren't, they were run off awful fast. Bill DeWild, retired member, Vernon, British Columbia.
These years of economic prosperity made it easy for the union to grow without carpenter-to-carpenter organizing. Membership increased, but only because of the booming economy. We failed to see that times were about to change. When the world's economy faltered in the early 1970s, Our industries changed, but we didn't. Construction markets expanded, but our local unions and district councils still represented the much smaller town and city markets of decades past. Though competition pushed our once small contractors to go regional, the UBC still operated as 2,000 local unions, and that forced even the most loyal employers to negotiate multiple contracts for their regional workforce. When contractors embraced new technologies to improve productivity, our skills were outmoded. We weren't trained for the new materials and techniques, and union members began losing their edge over less skilled but far cheaper workers. In the U.S., major industrial construction users banded together in a group called the Business Roundtable to forcefully bring construction wages down and productivity up. They championed the anti-union open shop and the merit shop. With a declining economy and this concerted business assault, union carpenters maintained dominant market share in only a few major markets. Elsewhere, the effects were devastating. When contracts ended, union employers turned away. Members took what work they could find, union or not. Members and contractors left the union in droves. Under attack and too set in its ways to respond and change, the UBC retreated. By the early 1990s, UBC membership was down by nearly half from just 20 years earlier. Market share was way down too. With membership and market share plummeting, wages and benefits followed. More members left as a result. There seemed to be no end to the cycle. The crisis was clear. Unless we rebuilt our ranks by organizing, rebuilt our skills by training, and helped rebuild our industries by improving productivity, our proud union would fade into oblivion. Worst of all, we would lose our standard of living, threatening the security of our families. It was time to change. In the mid-1990s, with new leadership and a vision for the future, the UBC met the crisis head-on. Now, in the 21st century, we are rebuilding our union. With a lot of hard work and dedication, we've turned the tide by going back to our historical roots. Back to a union devoted to organizing, focused on training, and structured for growth. Less than 10 years from our lowest point, we had gained back close to 100,000 members. Our market share has risen dramatically. Today, our skills training sets the standard in our industries and is once again second to none. We have formed new and strong partnerships with owners and contractors. We've again made the Brotherhood an organizing union that brings members, staff, and elected leaders together for collective action and growing strength. It hasn't been easy, but then carpenters have never been afraid to take on a tough job. In every craft and at every stage in our history, our strength has been greatest when we adapted to meet changing conditions. Today is no exception. Our members and our industries have been hit hard by the worldwide economic downturn that began in 2008. Today, because of the changes we've made, we are much better positioned to weather the storm. We will overcome this challenge as we have overcome other challenges in the past, by standing strong and building for the future. In the 21st century, we are moving forward. In 1881, our founders gave us an enduring blueprint. They declared, "We must form a union broad enough to embrace every carpenter in the land." That is still the vision of the UBC.